The monitor flatlined at 11:14 on a Tuesday night. I know the exact time because the nurse wrote it on the board across from my bed and I was staring at it when my chest stopped working. The last thing I heard before everything went dark was my daughter whispering to the doctor outside the curtain. She said if it happens again, just let him go. Then a voice I had not heard in almost 2 years cut through the hallway like a knife through wet paper. My son said, "You will bring him back every single time or I will stand in this hospital until the walls come down around me." To understand how I ended up on that table with my own blood betraying me and my family splitting in half over whether I deserve to keep breathing, I need to take you back. Not weeks, years. Back to when the silence started. My name is Thomas Edward Mitchell. I am 67 years old. I live in a town called Briar Creek in the rolling farmland of central Pennsylvania. Population around 4,000, depending on who you ask. I drove a 1994 Ford pickup the color of rust and October leaves. The transmission ground when I shifted into third, but she ran, and that was enough. My dog was a 14-year-old golden retriever named Captain. He moved slow. I moved slower. We understood each other. Every morning, I woke at 5:15. I put on coffee in a dented percolator that Margaret bought at a church rummage sale the year we got married. I fried 2 eggs in the same cast iron skillet my father left me. I ate them with toast and a glass of orange juice. Then I walked Captain down the gravel road past the Hendersons' dairy barn where the smell of hay and manure mixed into something that was not pleasant but was honest. By 7, I was at the diner, Miller's on Main, same booth every morning, second from the back left side against the window. Helen Miller knew my order before I sat down. Black coffee, 2 sugars, and a side of bacon she was not supposed to give me because of my blood pressure, but she did anyway, because that is how things work in small towns. Most folks in Briar Creek knew me as the retired shop teacher from the high school. I taught woodworking and basic metalwork for 19 years after I came back. Came back from where was a question nobody asked because I never offered the answer. I fixed screen doors for widows on Maple Street. I sharpened lawn mower blades for younger families who did not own a proper file. I rebuilt the fence around the church parking lot one summer using lumber I milled myself. I was quiet, ordinary, the kind of man people described as nice enough when his name came up. I preferred it that way. What nobody in Briar Creek knew was that before I taught teenagers how to build birdhouses, I spent 26 years in the United States Army. I retired as a colonel. My last posting was in military intelligence. I held a security clearance that most people do not know exists. I ran operations in places I still cannot name, but that was another life. The man who came home to Briar Creek wanted nothing more than sawdust on his boots and the sound of cicadas through the kitchen window. Margaret would have laughed at that. She always said I was the most dangerous man she ever met who could not figure out how to load the dishwasher properly. Margaret Rose Mitchell. She died 6 years ago this past March. Pancreatic cancer. The kind that whispers for months and then screams for weeks and then goes silent forever. She was 60 when they found it. 61 when it took her. She was smarter than me in every way that mattered. She read books I could not finish. She remembered birthdays I forgot. She knew when I was lying before the first word left my mouth. Margaret had a saying she repeated so often it became the wallpaper of our marriage. She said the people who love you the loudest are not always the ones holding you up. Watch for the quiet ones, Thomas. They are carrying the weight. I did not fully understand what she meant until the night I died on that hospital table. After Margaret passed, the house became a museum of her absence. I still made coffee for 2 every morning for the first year. The percolator made enough for 2 cups, and I could not bring myself to make less. I poured the second cup and set it across the table where she used to sit. Sometimes I talked to it. I told her about the weather, about what Captain did on our walk. I reached across the bed at night for months and found nothing but cold sheets and the faint smell of the lavender lotion she kept on the nightstand. The bottle was still there, half full. I never moved it. I had 2 children. Grace Margaret Mitchell was my oldest, 36. She had her mother eyes and her mother's stubbornness. She taught kindergarten at Briar Creek Elementary for 8 years. The children loved her. She made construction paper crowns for every birthday. She stayed late to help kids who struggled with reading. Grace was my anchor after Margaret died. She came to the house every Sunday. She brought dinner, roast chicken or meatloaf or sometimes a lasagna that tasted almost exactly like her mother's. She sat with me on the porch while Captain slept between us, and we watched the sky turn colors over the cornfield across the road. She did not try to fix the grief. She just sat in it with me. That kind of presence is rare. Daniel Thomas Mitchell was 29, different from Grace in almost every way. Where Grace was steady, Daniel was restless. He left Briar Creek at 18 with a backpack and a bus ticket and a quiet fury I never fully understood. He joined the Marines, served 2 tours overseas, came home with a scar above his left eyebrow and a silence that sat behind his eyes like something permanent. Daniel and I did not speak often, maybe 4 times a year. There was no fight between us, no single moment I could point to. It was more like a slow leak, years of me being gone for his childhood, classified assignments and missed baseball games and phone calls from hotel rooms in countries he could not know about. By the time I retired, Daniel was already gone. He lived in Charlottesville, Virginia. He worked as a carpenter building custom furniture. Beautiful work, clean joints, honest wood. He got that from me, even if he would never admit it. I had no idea that everything I believed about my family was about to be tested in ways I never trained for. Grace met a man named Victor Ashland when she was 35. He was 39, tall, square jaw, the kind of handsome that looked like it came from a catalog. He drove a black sedan that was always freshly washed. He wore shirts with cufflinks even on weekdays. He owned a commercial real estate firm based out of Harrisburg, and he talked about it constantly. Victor had a way of entering a room that made you feel like the room had been waiting for him. He shook your hand firmly. He looked you in the eye. He asked about your day and seemed to listen. The first time Grace brought him to Sunday dinner, I wanted to like him. My daughter had been alone since her divorce 3 years earlier. She deserved someone who would see her. Victor brought wildflowers, not roses, because Grace always said roses felt like an apology, and wildflowers felt like a Tuesday. He remembered my birthday. He brought whiskey that was better than anything I would buy for myself. He sat on the porch and asked about the town. He did not ask about the military because Grace told him I did not talk about it. I appreciated that. He carved out a space in our lives with precision. Margaret would have seen through it. I just saw a man who made my daughter smile, and that was enough. It should not have been. If this story is already pulling at something inside you, I hope you will stay with me. Subscribe to this channel so stories like this one keep reaching the people who need to hear them. The first time something felt wrong was at Thanksgiving, cold wind pushing through the valley. The smell of roasting turkey filled the kitchen. Grace had set the table with Margaret's good china, the plates with the blue flowers. Victor sat at the head of the table, my chair, the chair Margaret used to set my plate at. During dinner, he told a long story about a property deal. When I asked a simple question about the zoning, he paused and looked at me the way a professor looks at a student who interrupted the lecture. "Tom," he said, and nobody called me Tom. That is not really how zoning works. But I appreciate the curiosity. Then he patted my hand, like I was a child who had spoken out of turn. My jaw tightened. I looked at Grace. She was studying her plate. I let it go, but I watched him more carefully after that. The second incident was in December. Victor came to pick up Grace for a dinner. I was in the garage working on a rocking chair for the church nursery. He walked in, looked around, and said, "You know, Thomas, they have people who do this kind of thing professionally now. You do not have to live like a frontier museum." He laughed, the kind of laugh designed to make the insult sound like a joke. My hands were covered in walnut stain. The garage smelled of varnish and pine. I had built every shelf in that room with my own hands. I said nothing. I just kept sanding. A man who insults the place where you create things is telling you exactly who he is. He is telling you that what you build does not matter. The third time was quieter and worse. Grace came to Sunday dinner alone. Victor had a meeting, she said. Her hands trembled when she poured the coffee. She wore a sweater with long sleeves even though the house was warm. She laughed at things that were not funny. Short, nervous bursts of sound that had nothing to do with joy. When I asked if everything was okay with Victor, she flinched. Not dramatically, just a tiny contraction around her eyes. A microsecond of something that looked like fear. She said, "Everything is wonderful, Dad. He is so good to me." The words came out rehearsed. People who are truly happy do not need to convince you. They just are. The fourth incident happened at Miller's Diner on a Saturday morning. Grace and Victor came in for breakfast. I was in my usual booth. I watched Victor order. He spoke to Helen the way some men speak to people they consider beneath them, without looking at her. When the eggs arrived slightly over, he said loudly, "I asked for over easy, not over hard. Is that really so difficult?" Helen, who had been serving breakfast in that diner for 31 years, said nothing. She took the plate and walked back to the kitchen. Grace stared out the window. A man who humiliates a stranger in public will eventually humiliate everyone in private. That is not a theory. It is a law. The fifth thing I noticed was physical. Grace came over one evening in January to bring me soup. When she reached up to put a container in the cabinet, her sleeve pulled back. There was a bruise on her forearm, dark purple, the shape of fingers. She saw me looking. She pulled her sleeve down fast. "I bumped into the doorframe," she said. She smiled, but the smile did not reach her eyes, and her hand was shaking. Something inside me went perfectly still. Not calm. Still. The way a rifle goes still before the shot. That night after she left, I sat alone at the kitchen table for over an hour. Captain lay at my feet. The clock ticked. I heard Margaret's voice in my memory. "Watch for the quiet ones, Thomas. They are carrying the weight." My daughter was carrying weight I could not see. I still did not act. Because I had learned long ago in places far more dangerous than Briar Creek that the worst thing you can do when you finally see the enemy is let him know you see him. I had no idea that within 6 weeks I would be lying on a hospital gurney with my heart refusing to work and my family standing over me deciding whether I was worth saving. It was a Thursday evening in late February. Cold, the kind of Pennsylvania cold that settles into your bones. I was alone at the house. The phone rang. It was Grace. Her voice was wrong. Not the words, the frequency underneath. The sound of someone trying hard to sound normal while something terrible happens in the background. "Dad, can you come over? I just need help with something." I got in the truck. Her apartment was 12 minutes away. I pulled in. The lights were on. The door was unlocked. I walked in and found Grace sitting on the kitchen floor. Her lip was split. Her left eye was swelling. A chair was overturned. A coffee mug was shattered on the tile. She looked up at me and said, "He left 20 minutes ago. I am okay, Dad." She was not okay. I knelt beside her on that cold floor and held my daughter, and she cried into my shoulder, and I felt every year of my life settle onto my back like stones. My chest tightened, not from emotion, something physical and sharp, a pressure behind my sternum that radiated down my left arm. I ignored it. I cleaned the cut on her lip. I picked up the chair. I swept the mug. I made her tea. And then in the middle of pouring hot water, my vision went white. The last thing I remember is the kettle hitting the floor and Grace's voice screaming, "Dad." I woke up in Briar Creek General Hospital. Fluorescent lights, antiseptic air, beeping machines, a tube in my arm. The doctor told me later I had suffered a massive cardiac event. My heart stopped twice in the ambulance. They brought me back both times. I was in and out of consciousness for 3 days. During those days, I heard things, fragments of conversations drifting through fog. I heard Grace's voice in the hallway. She was talking to Victor. He was there, in my hospital, having a conversation about my life like it was a property listing. He said, "Grace, you have to think about what is best for him. He would not want to be kept alive like this. That is not living." A pause. Then Grace, quieter. "He always said he did not want to be a burden." I never said that. Not once. Not ever. But Victor had planted the idea so carefully over months that Grace believed it was a memory rather than a suggestion. That is what the most dangerous people do. They do not force you to think something. They make you believe you always thought it. I heard Grace talk to the doctor the next morning. Her voice was steady, controlled, coached. "If his heart stops again, I do not want you to resuscitate. He told us himself he would not want this." Then footsteps, fast, boots on linoleum. A voice I had not heard in almost 2 years. "Daniel, my son, he said you will not sign that order." The hallway went quiet. Daniel spoke again. His voice was not loud, but it filled every corner of that corridor. I got on a bus 6 hours ago because Helen Miller called me from the diner and told me Dad was in the hospital. I walked into this building and the first thing I hear is my sister telling a doctor to let our father die. So let me be clear, you will resuscitate him. Every single time his heart stops, you will bring him back. And if anyone has a problem with that, they can take it up with me. Silence. Then Grace. Daniel, you do not understand, Victor says. I do not care what Victor says. I care what Dad would say. And Dad is a fighter. Dad survived things you do not even know about. You do not get to decide he is done. Before I continue, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment right now and tell me what city you are watching from. I read every single one. Knowing you are out there keeps these stories alive. Daniel did not leave the hospital. He slept in the chair next to my bed for 4 days. He was there when I opened my eyes, reading a paperback Western with a cracked spine. When he saw me looking, he closed the book and said, "Welcome back, old man." My throat was dry. My body felt reassembled by someone who lost a few pieces. But I was alive, and my son was sitting next to me. I reached out and he took my hand, calloused, a worker's hands. He said, "I am sorry I was not here sooner." I said, "You were here when it mattered. When I was strong enough, Daniel told me everything. What Grace said to the doctor, Victor coaching her, Victor calling the hospital asking about my insurance and estate. Then he told me something that changed everything. Dad, he said, I have been looking into Victor Ashland for 2 months. Grace called me in December crying. She told me things then, took them back the next day. But I know my sister. So I started digging." He paused. "Victor Ashland has done this before. 2 ex-wives, both filed restraining orders. One ended up in the emergency room in Lancaster. He changed his name from Ashford to Ashland after the second divorce. And he has been pressuring Grace to add his name to her apartment deed. I lay there and felt something I had not felt in years. Not anger, the cold, precise focus that used to settle over me before an operation, every variable clicking into place. I closed my eyes. Margaret's voice. Watch for the quiet ones. They are carrying the weight. Daniel had been carrying weight I did not know about for months. While I sat in my booth eating bacon, my son was 200 miles away, protecting his sister. When they released me, I did not go home to rest. I went home to prepare. I sat in the living room and opened the old footlocker from the hall closet, the one Margaret called your other life. Inside were my service records, my medals, photographs of men I served with. I did not open it for nostalgia. I opened it because I needed to remember who I was before I became the quiet man who fixed fences. I was not just a shop teacher. I was a man who spent 26 years protecting people who could not protect themselves. I picked up the phone and called Daniel. "Come home. Bring everything you have on Victor Ashland." He said, "I am already in the truck." Then I called Colonel James Whitfield, retired, living outside Carlisle. We served together for 11 years. He had contacts in law enforcement across 3 states. I told him what I needed. He said to give me 48 hours. I said, "You have 24. He laughed the way only old soldiers laugh when the mission is clear. James delivered within 18 hours. Victor Ashland born Victor. James Ashford had 2 previous marriages ending in protective orders, a civil judgment for financial fraud, an ongoing investigation by the State Attorney General's office into falsified property appraisals and shell companies. The man who sat at my Thanksgiving table was not a successful businessman. He was a professional predator who moved from family to family, consuming everything he touched. Daniel arrived on a Friday. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Margaret used to do her crossword puzzles. We laid everything out. Daniel's research, James Whitfield's contacts, the hospital records, the restraining orders, the fraud documents. Daniel looked at me. "What is the plan?" I said, "Grace is hosting a dinner next Saturday. Victor will be there. She told me it is an announcement dinner. I think he is going to propose." Daniel stared at me. "Then that is when we do it." We spent 7 days preparing. Daniel contacted Victor's first ex-wife, Sarah, living outside Reading. She had not spoken to Victor in 4 years. Daniel sat in her kitchen and told her about Grace. Sarah cried. Then she gave Daniel a written statement, 3 pages. The second ex-wife, Elena, had moved to Ohio. She wrote a letter. She said, "If this helps another woman get free, then use it. I called the state attorney's office and spoke with an investigator named Robert Chen. I told him what we had. He was quiet. Then he said, Colonel Mitchell, I have been building a case against this man for 14 months. If your daughter cooperates, we can accelerate significantly. I said she will cooperate. She just does not know it yet. The dinner was on a Saturday in late March, the first warm evening after a long winter. Grace had set up her dining room with candles and cloth napkins. She invited me and Daniel and 2 teacher friends and Victor's business partner, Marcus Cole. Victor arrived in his black sedan, gray suit, a bottle of wine, and a small velvet box in his jacket pocket. I saw the outline when he hung his coat. He shook my hand. Thomas, good to see you on your feet. I smiled. It takes more than a tired heart to keep me down. Grace had made pot roast. The kitchen smelled of rosemary and onions and warm bread. Victor was charming. He told stories. He complimented the food. He put his hand on Grace's shoulder and she smiled at him, and for one moment I saw what she saw. The man she wanted him to be. The man who brought wildflowers and made the loneliness stop. Something in my chest ached because I knew what was about to happen, and I knew it would hurt her before it helped her. Victor stood up during dessert. He tapped his glass. He looked around with the confidence of a man who has never been told no in a way that stuck. He said, I have something I want to say. I looked at Daniel across the table. Daniel gave me the smallest nod. Victor pulled out the velvet box. Grace, I know we have only been together for a year, but I stood up. My chair did not scrape. I stood the way I used to stand in briefing rooms. Straight. Quiet. Every eye shifted to me. Victor stopped. I said, Victor, before you finish, there are some things the people in this room need to know. His smile stayed, but something behind it flickered. Grace looked at me. Dad, what are you doing? I reached into the bag by my chair. I pulled out a folder. I set it on the table. Victor, I said calmly, your real name is Victor James Ashford. You changed it after your second wife, Elena, filed a restraining order in Franklin County. Your first wife, Sarah, filed one before that. His hand holding the velvet box lowered to his side. There is an active investigation into your real estate dealings, I continued. Falsified appraisals, shell companies, fraud. The room was silent. I opened the folder. Statements from Sarah and Elena, the fraud summary, the hospital phone records, the restraining orders. I looked at Grace. Sweetheart, I said, and my voice softened. This man told you I would not want to be revived. He stood in that hospital and coached you into telling a doctor to let your father die. Those are not the words of a man who loves you. Those are the words of a man who needed me out of the way. Margaret's voice echoed one final time. The people who love you the loudest are not always the ones holding you up. Watch for the quiet ones. Grace, I said quietly, Daniel has been carrying your weight for months. He drove across the state because a waitress called him. He slept in a hospital chair for 4 days. He found the women Victor hurt before you. He did all of this quietly. Because that is what love looks like. It does not perform. It shows up. Grace's eyes moved to Daniel. He was sitting perfectly still, hands folded on the table. He had not said a word. Something broke open in my daughter's face, slowly, the way ice cracks on a pond in spring. One line, then another, then everything underneath giving way. Victor spoke. His voice had lost its polish. Thomas, this is not what you think. I did not respond to him. Robert Chen from the attorney's office is expecting your call. Monday morning, I said, if you cooperate, the consequences will be less severe. That is not a threat. It is math. I sat down. Victor stood there, the box still in his hand. He looked at Grace, at me, at Daniel. His shoulders dropped. The charm drained from his face the way color drains from a sky after sunset. He set the box on the table. He picked up his coat. At the door, he stopped. He did not turn around. He said, I was not always like this. I do not know if that was true. He left. Grace sat at the table for a long time. Daniel moved to the chair beside her. He did not say anything. He just sat there, present. She leaned into him and closed her eyes. I picked up the plates. I washed the dishes. The water was warm. The soap smelled like lemons. Outside the window, the last light was turning the trees golden. Sometimes the most important thing you can do after everything falls apart is wash the dishes. That was 5 months ago. Grace moved to a small cottage on the edge of town near the school. 2 bedrooms, a garden in the back. She planted tomatoes and sunflowers. She went back to teaching full-time. The children still get construction paper crowns on their birthdays. Daniel stayed in Briar Creek for 3 weeks, the longest he had been home in years. He slept in his old room. The walls still had the model airplane he built when he was 12. We did not resolve years of distance in one visit, but we sat on the porch every evening, we drank coffee, Captain lay between us, and we watched the sky turn colors and go quiet. One evening, Daniel said, "Dad, I'm sorry I stayed away so long. It was not because I did not love you. It was because I did not know how to be near you without feeling like I was not enough." I looked at my son, the man who got on a bus and traveled 6 hours because a waitress called, the man who stood in a hospital hallway and told a doctor to keep his father alive. I said, "Daniel, you are more than enough. You always were. I just did not know how to say it when it mattered." He nodded. Captain sighed the way old dogs sigh, deep and satisfied. Daniel went back to Charlottesville eventually, but he calls every week now, sometimes twice. We talk about wood, grain patterns, joint techniques, simple things, real things. Grace comes to Sunday dinner again. She brings her friend Anna. Sometimes she brings a student who does not have a family dinner to go to. I set an extra plate without asking. I still go to Miller's every morning. Same booth. Helen still gives me the bacon. I started going to the Veterans Breakfast at the VFW on Saturdays. I volunteer at the church food pantry. I built 3 bookshelves for the elementary school library. Grace helped me sand them. Daniel sent the hardware from Virginia. Brass brackets he made himself. When I was young, I believed strength meant control. I believed the strongest man in the room was the one who could shape every outcome. War taught me that strength is endurance. Standing up after you have been knocked down so many times, the ground starts to feel familiar. But aging taught me the real truth. Real strength is not what you do when everyone is watching. It is what your son does when he gets on a bus at midnight because someone told him you needed help. It is what your daughter does when she finally sees the truth and chooses herself over the lie. It is washing the dishes after the world falls apart, because love does not wait for the dramatic moment. It shows up in the kitchen with warm water and soap that smells like lemons. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you of someone who loved you quietly when you were not watching, share it with them. Send it to the person who showed up when you needed them. Subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. And leave a comment telling me which moment hit you the hardest. Sometimes the people who need these words the most find them because someone like you pressed share. Margaret was right. The people who love you the loudest are not always the ones holding you up. Watch for the quiet ones. They are carrying the weight. My son carried mine, and I am still here because of it.